Black Company by Glen Cook. I love this series. I've read them all. He wrote the first one in 1984, and the next one is coming out like in a few weeks. Very excited about that. He's like 80 years old now, and he's got like a 4-novel arc ready to go. Let's start with the first one. Love these covers. I have a feeling I might have actually seen this on the shelf of a bookstore when I was a kid, and might have looked through it but didn't buy it. I wouldn't have understood it then anyway. I found another version of this cover at Savers, but I like this one better. I'll probably give this one to someone and keep this one. Before I read this, I heard a podcast about it on YouTube, and they were just like breaking down the first chapter. I'll leave a link to that podcast, and I'm really glad I did, because I think if I had started reading it without hearing that, I would have missed a lot of things that the writer is doing. For example, in the first chapter, a pretty important character is killed, but the narrator doesn't say it explicitly because it kind of makes his company look bad, so it's kind of like implied. And I think this podcast does a great job of breaking down all of the sort of techniques that the author uses. And once I heard that and then read it, I was kind of locked in. A brief summary of what the book is all about. It's a mercenary company in like sword and sorcery days. Doesn't say like if it's Earth or anything like that. And it's told first person from the point of view of the company physician, whose name is Croker. And he's also the analyst, meaning that he keeps the annals of the company. And the company has like sorcerers, who are also really interesting characters. The basic plot of the first novel is they start out working for this syndic of this town, and things are kind of falling apart. They wind up like backstabbing him and working for somebody else that turns out to be possibly way more evil. I'm going to try to get through this review without spoilers, even though I'm going into like multiple books. So basically what I would recommend is listen until you think that it sounds really good, and then stop listening and actually read it, and then come back and listen to the review. But do whatever you want to do. I'm not the boss of you. You're the boss of you. Glen Cook was in the military. I think he was in the Navy around Vietnam era. And the tone of the book, even though it's set in like sword and sorcery times, seems very much like it's coming from the point of view of Vietnam era soldiers. Throughout the series, it's kind of an exploration of like ancient magic from the point of view of like a 60s platoon. And it's kind of an unusual mix. Sometimes it's a little weird because like the language sort of sounds a little too modern than makes sense. He's got another series called the Dread Empire series that doesn't have this modern sounding language. I haven't finished it. So far, I don't like it as much as the Black Company series, but I hope to get through the Dread Empire series as well. It's probably great. Going through the whole Black Company series, I liked all the books, some maybe a little more than others, and I think I'll talk a little bit about each one briefly, starting with the first book. All the other books, in terms of like chapter length, are all over the place. They could be very short or very long chapters. You know, you could have like 30, 40. I think some of the books go up to like 80 chapters. But this one is only 7 chapters. And each one kind of has a beginning, middle, and an end. And I love the way he did that. And like when you go on to the next chapter, usually some time has passed. And it's not instantly apparent what has happened in that time in between. For example, in chapter 3, they have successfully established a garrison in this town called the Salient, and things are going great. And then in the beginning of chapter 4 starts with them in retreat from Salient, and the main character is like walking backwards, watching, to see if rebels are following them. That struck me as really masterful storytelling technique. When it comes to military movements and large battles, Glen Cook does a great job. There is a massive battle at the end of this book, and I dare say Tolkien-esque in its description, but this is kind of an anti-Tolkien series. That's why I wouldn't actually call it fantasy. I'm thinking about making another video about what is sci-fi, but this book strikes me more as sci-fi than fantasy. I think that to be fantasy, there's an element that has to have, like, I don't know, shining knights of unimpingeable valor or something. And these characters are definitely flawed. I read some things that Tolkien wrote about other authors. There was a lot of authors that he didn't like. For example, Frank Herbert. I think he didn't like the moral ambiguity. And to me, I think there's a place for both kind of novels. A novel can be great with clearly defined good guys and bad guys. And a novel can also be great with sort of a more realistic and complicated distribution of good and evil. I think that maybe Tolkien thought that if it's complicated, that means that the writer is promoting evil. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. And this book goes into some dark places and asks a lot of really interesting moral questions. And it also begins a love story that goes on through the series, which winds up kind of being the heart of the series, I think. But I won't give too much away. But yeah, after this first book, I was hooked. There's a couple of moments in this book where I was just like, that's freaking great. The second book, Shadows Linger, was released in the same year, 1984. This one splits the narrative. Half of it is told from the point of view of the same narrator, and half of it is told like third person of some other characters in a different location. And those two storylines come together towards the end. And that kind of splitting up between first person and third person happens a bunch of times throughout the series, which is not my favorite. Sometimes I find that a little jarring. But after the first book, it's too late. You know, you're hooked on the characters. One storyline takes place in a poverty-stricken town called Juniper. And that one involves characters called Raven and Darling, and a new character who's a owner of an inn, and his name is Shed. And that is a very dark storyline, very Edgar Allan Poe, as they're bringing dead bodies to this dark castle to sell. This novel expands on the lore of the sort of demigod characters and also ends in a huge, weird battle at that dark castle. There's a bunch of really messed up, demonically empowered villains in this series that keep coming back, such as the Limper. And Cook always does a great job of just describing a little bit of what they look like, but never a lot, so the reader does most of the imagining on their own. I think that's also a really good technique. The White Rose concludes the trilogy of the Books of the North and expands even more of the mystical forces involved in this world, including an ancient sentient tree and an area called the Plane of Fear, where the company is hiding out, where the presence of some of these ancient entities has caused the laws of physics to be very different. So you have talking stones that sort of teleport, and flying whales, which are kind of part octopus, and stuff like that. This book brings a massive change to one of the main characters who is involved with Croaker, which is such a cool plot twist and really nicely sets up the rest of the series. I also want to point out that Glen Cook does a good job of making things feel realistic by not putting the narrator always at the center of the action. Sometimes very important stuff happens and he's not even there. And then on other times, he's front and center for decisive moments. Quite a few. White Rose was released in 1985, and then both of these novels were released in 1989. I kind of read them at the same time, but I recommend Silver Spike first. The author of these early covers is Keith Burdack. This is one of my favorite ones. And that's also one of my favorite characters, Toad Killer Dog. He's not actually a dog. He's some kind of demon. This novel sort of ties up events in the Barrowlands from the previous books, and this one follows the company escaping south. These two novels are not my favorite in the series, but they're still really good. And in these books, Glen Cook starts using a theme which he uses more and more and better in all the books that follow, which is the sort of concept of a long slog, where the book starts with characters enduring a long period of hardship, whether they're on a difficult and boring journey or they are holed up in a town which is under siege. You really get a sense of place and misery. And when things start to break loose and the SHIT hits the FAN, it's very exciting. More so than if it had just been action from start to end, I think. So yes, excellent slogs. The next one is Dreams of Steel, came out in 1990. This is a great one. The narrator is Lady, who's one of the main characters, and this is her like trying to keep the company together. She joins forces with this weird, gross cult called the Deceivers, whose religion is based on like assassinating people by strangling them with these cloths they called rummels. And she learns how to do it and becomes like their goddess and stuff like that. It's a great one. Followed by Bleak Seasons in 1996. New cover artist, new narrator. I think this book is one of the best in the series. The narrator is basically like kind of tripping through most of it. His name is Mergen, and he's experiencing like time displacement and hallucinations and remote viewing and stuff like that. The book is kind of all over the place with that, but towards the end, the reasons for it all become clear. And this book shows Glen Cook dealing with issues of sadness and loss in such a cool way. Glittering Plain refers to the new elements of the sci-fi lore that are being explored in this series. The world just gets thicker and more interesting as the series goes on. Again, this book is heartbreaking in places, but never heavy-handed or sentimental. Love it. The next one is She Is the Darkness. Came out in 1997. As you can see, it's much longer, and most of the books are longer as they go on. I don't love this cover, but the book is great, and it leads to the company actually traveling into the area called the Glittering Plain, which is when they finally walk into it, it's about as good as it can get for a sci-fi kind of thing, in my estimation. And then Water Sleeps takes place 15 years later. The narrator is a character named Sleepy. What's left of the company is mostly like members of this race of people called Yungbao, and most of the book is them planning and then executing a rescue mission. This cover does not look anything like what that character looks like described in the novel. Here's a piece of fan art that's much closer. It's not exact, but it's much closer to what that character, Shivetya, looks like. Then comes Soldiers Live in 2000, which is the most recent book in the series. And it's getting hard to describe what's going on in these books without series-wide spoilers. But it's great. Some old characters die and some new ones come on board and a new location is explored. And it sets up the new series, which is coming out, I think, November 4th. And the new series is called A Pitiless Reign. And the first book is called Lies Weeping. So I'll be reading that on the first day. And then there's a few books and stories that were published that take place in between, mostly, I think, between books 3 and books 4, such as Port of Shadows. This has really bad reviews all over the internet. I think it's great. I think it's just as good as all the other stuff. Then he has a bunch of short stories published in these collections, which include stuff by other authors. I've read the first 3 of them, and there's 4 more, which I'll have to get to before Lies Weeping comes out. I'm sure the new book series is going to be in the larger format, like Port of Shadows, and also the collections of the earlier novels that were published more recently, which I wish they would publish the new books in the same size, just because it looks more, cohesive, coherent, consistent on the shelf, but whatever. The art on these covers is pretty good. Anyway, that's my basic series review for The Black Company. I hope I've wet your whistle for checking it out, and please do. And I will definitely drop a review after I read the new novel. Keep going, Glenn Cook. Thank you for the amazing stories you've created. And keep them coming, baby. Keep them coming. Ha, there's crows in the woods. Soul Catcher is listening.